Character by Samuel Smiles. Chapter 2c. We have spoken of the mother of Napoleon Bonaparte as a woman of great force of character. Not less so was the mother of the Duke of Wellington, whom her son strikingly resembled in features, person, and character. While his father was principally distinguished as a musical composer and performer. But, strange to say, Wellington's mother mistook him for a dunce, and for some reason or other he was not such a favorite as her other children, until his great deeds in after life constrained her to be proud of him. The Napiers were blessed in both parents, but especially in their mother, Lady Sarah Lennox, who early sought to inspire her sons' minds with elevating thoughts, admiration of noble deeds, and a chivalrous spirit, which became embodied in their lives, and continued to sustain them until death in the path of duty and honor. Among statesmen, lawyers, and divines, we find marked mention made of the mothers of Lord Chancellors Bacon, Erskine, and Brougham, all women of great ability, and, in the case of the first, of great learning, as well of the mothers of Canning, Curran, and President Adams, of Herbert, Paley, and Wesley. Lord Brougham speaks in terms almost approaching reverence of his grandmother, the sister of Professor Robertson, as having been mainly instrumental in instilling into his mind a strong desire for information, and the first principles of that preserving energy in the pursuit of every kind of knowledge which formed his prominent characteristic throughout life. Canning's mother was an Irishwoman of great natural ability, for whom her gifted son entertained the greatest love and respect to the close of his career. She was a woman of no ordinary intellectual power. Indeed, says Canning's biographer, were we not otherwise assured of the fact from direct sources, it would be impossible to contemplate his profound and touching devotion to her without being led to conclude that the object of such unchanging attachment must have possessed of rare and commanding qualities. She was esteemed by the circle in which she lived as a woman of great mental energy. Her conversation was animated and vigorous, and marked by a distinct originality of manner and a choice of topics fresh and striking, and out of the commonplace routine. To persons who were but slightly acquainted with her, the energy of her manner had even something of the air of eccentricity. Curran speaks with great affection of his mother, as a woman of strong original understanding, to whose wise counsel, consistent piety, and lessons of honorable ambition, which she diligently enforced on the minds of her children, he himself principally attributed his success in life. "The only inheritance," he used to say, "that I could boast of from my poor father was the very scanty one of an unattractive face and person, like his own, and if the world has ever attributed to me something more valuable than face or person, or than earthly wealth, it was that another and a dearer parent gave her child a portion from the treasure of her mind." When ex-President Adams was present at the examination of a girls' school in Boston, he was presented by the pupils with an address which deeply affected him, and in acknowledging it he took the opportunity of referring to the lasting influence which womanly training and association had exercised upon his own life and character. "As a child," he said, "I enjoyed, perhaps, the greatest of blessings that can be bestowed on man, that of a mother who was anxious and capable to form the characters of her children rightly. From her I derived whatever instruction, religious especially and moral, has pervaded a long life. I will not say perfectly, or as it ought to be, but I will say, because it is only justice to the memory of her I revere, that in the course of that life, whatever imperfection there has been, or deviation from what she taught me, the fault is mine and not hers. The Wesleys were peculiarly linked to their parents by natural piety, though the mother, rather than the father, influenced their minds and developed their characters. The father was a man of strong will, but occasionally harsh and tyrannical in his dealings with his family, while the mother, with much strength of understanding and ardent love of truth, was gentle, persuasive, affectionate, and simple. She was the teacher and cheerful companion of her children, who gradually became molded by her example. It was through the bias given by her to her sons' minds in religious matters that they acquired the tendency which, even in early years, drew to them the name of Methodists. In a letter to her son, Samuel Wesley, when a scholar at Westminster in 1709, she said, "I would advise you as much as possible to throw your business into a certain method, by which means you will learn to improve every precious moment, and find an unspeakable facility in the performance of your respective duties." This method she went on to describe, exhorting her son in all things to act upon principle, and the society which the brothers John and Charles afterwards founded at Oxford is supposed to have been in a great measure the result of her exhortations. In the case of poets, literary men, and artists, the influence of the mother's feeling and taste has doubtless had great effect in directing the genius of their sons, and we find this especially illustrated in the lives of Gray, Thomson, Scott, Southey, Bulwer, Schiller, and Goethe. Gray inherited almost complete his kind and loving nature from his mother, while his father was harsh and unamiable. Gray was, in fact, a feminine man, shy, reserved, and wanting in energy, but thoroughly irreproachable in life and character. The poet's mother maintained the family after her unworthy husband had deserted her, and at her death, Gray placed on her grave, in Stoke Poges, an epitaph describing her as the careful, tender mother of many children, one of whom alone had the misfortune to survive her. The poet himself was, at his own desire, interred beside her worshipped grave. Goethe, like Schiller, owed the bias of his mind and character to his mother, who was a woman of extraordinary gifts. She was full of joyous, flowing mother wit, and possessed in a high degree the art of stimulating young and active minds, instructing them in the science of life out of the treasures of her abundant experience. After a lengthened interview with her, an enthusiastic traveler said, "Now, do I understand how Goethe has become the man he is?" Goethe himself affectionately cherished her memory. "She was worthy of life," he once said of her, and when he visited Frankfurt, he sought out every individual who had been kind to his mother and thanked them all. It was Ary Scheffer's mother, whose beautiful features the painter so loved to reproduce in his pictures of Beatrice, Saint Monica, and others of his works, that encouraged his study of art, and by great self-denial provided him with the means of pursuing it. While living at Dordrecht in Holland, she first sent him to Lille to study, and afterwards to Paris, and her letters to him, while absent, were always full of sound motherly advice and affectionate womanly sympathy. "If you could but see me," she wrote on one occasion, "kissing your picture, then, after a while, taking it up again, and, with a tear in my eye, calling you my beloved son, you would comprehend what it costs me to use sometimes the stern language of authority, and to occasion to you moments of pain. Work diligently, be, above all, modest and humble, and when you find yourself excelling others, then compare what you have done with nature itself, or with the ideal of your own mind, and you will be secured, by the contrast which will be apparent, against the effects of pride and presumption." Long years after, when Ary Scheffer was himself a grandfather, he remembered with affection the advice of his mother, and repeated it to his children. And thus the vital power of good example lives on from generation to generation, keeping the world ever fresh and young. Writing to his daughter, Madame Marjolaine, in 1846, his departed mother's advice recurred to him, and he said, "The word must. Fix it well in your memory, dear child. Your grandmother seldom had it out of hers. The truth is, that through our lives nothing brings any good fruit except what is earned by either the work of the hands or by the exertion of one's self-denial. Sacrifices must, in short, be ever going on, if we would obtain any comfort or happiness. Now that I am no longer young, I declare that few passages in my life afford me so much satisfaction as those in which I made sacrifices or denied myself enjoyments. Das Entsagen, the forbidden, is the motto of the wise man. Self-denial is the quality of which Jesus Christ set us the example. The French historian Michelet makes the following touching reference to his mother in the preface to one of his most popular books, the subject of much embittered controversy at the time at which it appeared. "Whilst writing this, I have had in my mind a woman, whose strong and serious mind would not have failed to support me in these contentions. I lost her 30 years ago, was a child then. Nevertheless, ever living in my memory, she follows me from age to age. She suffered with me in my poverty, and was not allowed to share my better fortune. When young, I made her sad, and now I cannot console her. I know not even where her bones are. I was too poor then to buy earth to bury her, and yet I owe her much. I feel deeply that I am the son of woman, every constant in my ideas and words, not to mention my features and gestures. I find again my mother in myself. It is my mother's blood which gives me the sympathy I feel for bygone ages, and the tender remembrance of all those who are now no more. What return then could I, who am myself advancing towards old age, make her for the many things I owe her, one for which she would have thanked me?" This protest in favor of women and mothers. But while a mother may greatly influence the poetic or artistic mind of her son for good, she may also influence it for evil. Thus the characteristics of Lord Byron, the waywardness of his impulses, his defiance of restraint, the bitterness of his hate, and the precipitancy of his resentments, were traceable in no small degree to the adverse influences exercised upon his mind from his birth by his capricious, violent, and headstrong mother. She even taunted her son with his personal deformity, and it was no unfrequent occurrence in the violent quarrels which occurred between them, for her to take up the poker or tongs and hurl them after him as he fled from her presence. It was this unnatural treatment that gave a morbid turn to Byron's afterlife, and careworn, unhappy, great, and yet weak as he was, he carried about with him the mother's poison, which he had sucked in his infancy. Hence he exclaims in his Childe Harold, "Yet must I think less wildly, I have thought, too long and darkly, till my brain became, in its own eddy boiling and o'erwrought, a whirling gulf of fantasy and flame. And thus, untaught in youth my heart to tame, my springs of life were poisoned." In like manner, though in a different way, the character of Mrs. Foote, the actor's mother, was curiously repeated in the life of her joyous, jovial-hearted son. Though she had been heiress to a large fortune, she soon spent it all, and was at length imprisoned for debt. In this condition she wrote to Sam, who had been allowing her 100 a year out of the proceeds of his acting. "Dear Sam, I'm in prison for debt. Come and assist your loving mother, E. Foote." To which her son characteristically replied, "Dear mother, so am I," which prevents his duty being paid to his loving mother by her affectionate son, Sam Foote. A foolish mother may also spoil a gifted son by imbuing his mind with unsound sentiments. Thus Lamartine's mother is said to have trained him in altogether erroneous ideas of life in the school of Rousseau and Bernardin de Saint-Pierre, by which his sentimentalism, sufficiently strong by nature, was exaggerated instead of repressed, and he became the victim of tears, affection, and improvidence, all his life long. It almost savors of the ridiculous to find Lamartine, in his Confidences, representing himself as a statue of adolescence raised as a model for young men. As he was his mother's spoilt child, so he was the spoilt child of his country to the end, which was bitter and sad. St. Beuve says of him, he was the continual object of the richest gifts, which he had not the power of managing, scattering and wasting them, all excepting the gift of words, which seemed inexhaustible, and on which he continued to play to the end as on an enchanted flute. End of section 7.